1. I think we're live. Let me just.
They think we're live.
Yeah. Let me just.
But are we live?
Let me just smooth down that Spotify slider. I'm sure there's a function that would just let me naturally let it fade, but I just have to do it by hand. But yeah, we're live. This is the Digipod Pokécast show.
I like how that's phrased because it brings up something that's been on my mind a lot lately, which is how fun it is to inspire dumb chants to audiences.
Yes.
Like if you just, I think it occurred to Jack and I at the last Stab White Elephant game that we did this last holiday season, because if you just start repeating something like this in this cadence, people will get back on board with you. And I love that so much because you can get people chanting for the dumbest shit, like the Digipod Pokécast show.
And it works at home. You know people are cheering at home.
I'm so glad it's ours.
Yes. Oh, so hopefully all of you are chanting and ready for today's programming. We're going to get real on this one.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
We've been fake this entire time.
Yeah,
I feel like that's so obvious.
Yeah, everything's been scripted till now.
Mm-hmm. Because we've been really trying to, craft our personas for this show. We want to present something polished to the world that isn't quite ourselves, but is more in line with what the folks upstairs want this show to be. Could you imagine if Jesse had any kind of control creatively over Stab programming, and if he was guys, you need to. We need more sex. For one thing, you need more sex.
It's just like, Cory, what if you were a British orphan as a child, and that's why you got into Digimon? Can you rewrite that into the show?
I feel like it would give real stakes.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about how the transition to the Digi world was your transition into America as a wee little lad.
Yes.
No, but we're real, and as two people that are now adults and were children who grew up with these monster franchises, there are definitely times that these had emotional impacts in our lives, I'd say.
Oh yeah, big time. So what we were thinking is that this episode could be, as most of our episodes are, a very loose conversation that's around the general topic of those moments that hit you as a kid, those moments that are maybe a little bit deeper than the majority of what the show is putting out, and I think that throughout the 90s shows had moments like these that were really great. I think that was a good time in just children's programming where they were able to kind of, I don't want to say sneak stuff in, but there was a place for it that I mean, I don't know if I'm talking out of turn here, but from what I could gather from most children's TV animation through the 80s, that really wasn't part of it. It was a lot more superficial, I think, in the 80s. Because I think it was so much more geared towards just selling product. And that's not that went away altogether in the 90s, but I feel like storytelling didn't take quite as much of a back seat as it did in the 80s. So fast forward now to the 90s, and we have these two beautiful franchises. I think that they were set up for success to explore some topics, because in both situations you have kids taken out of their safe space and hurled into an environment that is at times very dangerous, at times very scary, and just at its core, unfamiliar. I think that's the main through line with both of these franchises, just unfamiliarity, and sometimes that can be exciting, but for the most part, I think it's usually a child's first instinct is to be scared. Yeah. So it's just primed for those moments that can really get you.
I will say Digimon hits that a lot stronger. They're in a new world. They're experiencing new things. They are alone,
Yeah. They could die.
Yeah. Pokemon has some of that because, our trio set off on an adventure, but Brock's kind of an adult, you think. They don't play with ages too much. And this is something expected in the Pokemon world. Not every 10-year-old goes off on an adventure, but some do.
Yeah.
So yeah, but they both do have all those key like points to set up for success, to tell a story for children to relate to think about things that I don't think other kids media told, because I think a lot of other kids media that did play on feelings or things like that were more about morals and values, to whereas Digimon and Pokemon we'll probably touch on that, but it's more about situations, like adverse situations you go through and how you can cope through that, which is a much different skill than just learning empathy, like Care Bears and stuff,
Yeah, because I feel like, and that's a great example with Care Bears, because I was thinking of like those kind of 80s shows that were so moralistic, and I feel like a lot of their lessons are easier said than done. If you're just saying you should be empathetic, like that doesn't actually teach a kid. Like, I feel like it makes more sense to show them a scenario where a character that they can relate to is actually struggling with it, rather than being told to do it and then just doing it.
Which I think shows that involve humans, it's a lot easier to do. You look at something like Hey Arnold, a show I did not like as a child, but look back and see its like major importance. That was very much like a show that taught empathy between like people and caring and stuff like that. To whereas even though that does happen a lot in Digimon and Pokemon, I don't think it lends itself as much, except for like a certain niche group of people that might like have a hard time connecting to humans, so they connect to something abstract and then think, oh, how that actually applies to other people. And by niche audience, I'm mostly kind of referring to like neurodivergent, like autism, people like me, that definitely like helps that like 1-2 barrier. Like, okay, first learn the principle and then learn to connect it to people and stuff. So it's good that media kind of found all these different ways to teach these different things to children.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I've done next to no preparation for this episode, because we decided to do this topic several hours ago.
Yeah.
So this will be very freewheeling. There are moments that come to mind immediately, but I want to keep this open to like, if it sparks a thought, even in another franchise beyond the two greatest of all time, let's talk about those too, because I feel like it all feeds back into what we're talking about, which is like this recurring theme, I think, just of our show, which is like both of these shows at their best never talk down to their audience. And I think that's when you can actually delve into those topics, is when you're approaching your audience as more of an equal.
I think there's only one time that I can remember where the Pokemon show didn't respect their audience. And that was when they, in the English dub, Brock has like a rice ball, and they call it a jelly donut. Yeah, because children can't handle the thought of a different culture's food. Which is,
and you know what? That pisses me off so much, because I didn't learn that until like into high school.
Yeah.
that wasn't just what maybe that part of that culture called a donut.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, they called it, because I figured that it was probably a little rice thing, and maybe it had some jelly inside. Like, that was my assumption.
I mean, the British call things wacky stuff all the time. I know. Like cookies, biscuits, chips.
I guess that's a donut.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's stupid. Just why couldn't we call it a rice ball?
Yeah. But otherwise, yes, very, very respectful to their audience, and teaching them. Do you want to talk a little bit about like respecting children, being able to handle fear, and like the start of Digimon? Because Digimon just starts off scary, I think.
Immediately. Because I think that fear is such a, I mean, it's an obligatory component to Digimon in particular. And it really doesn't shy away too much, even in the first episode to begin with, but also just that first stretch of episodes in season 1, where you have real stakes, you have real, like, I don't know, these I don't know, the way the monsters are is just so much more grotesque than I think we were used to at the time.
Yes.
For children's cartoons. I mean, Monster Rancher comes to mind, but even that was kind of silly. Like it had a silliness to it,
I
so
think
it wasn't quite as scary.
I think something interesting about Digimon is their size. Because when something's the size of Godzilla, it's so big, it's like out of your scope. Like it's just destroying everything, but it's not attacking you.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at other like monstrous villains in cartoons where they're an antagonist, they're attacking the villains, they're the same size. But these champion level Digimon that you see at the beginning of the series, like Kuwagamon, they're bigger, but not so big they don't recognize you. So it's like this new
Yeah.
thing. I think it was very new to see something big enough that like you have no power against it, but also it's specifically after you or your group
Yes,
of kids.
and I think you stumbled on something there with like have power against it. Like I think prior to that, like when I'm thinking of monsters in children's programming, I'm thinking, Power Rangers. I'm thinking, giant monsters facing, importantly here, heroes, like, super powered heroes. So it's a little different when you're a kid
Mm-hmm.
being chased by a monster,
Yes.
and yeah, you have this little Digimon partner, but you don't know what they can do yet.
Yeah.
Frankly, they don't even know what they can do yet. So it's very scary. Yeah,
What's
I
really
had
cool
more
about
thought there, but
well, maybe it'll come up and interrupt me if it does.
it
But
might.
what's cool about Digimon is that the whole series has growth in mind, whether it's about digital growth or emotional growth with your partner being like someone who helps you emotionally grow through different things of your personality. But also the way they overcome adversaries is very much like I'm a weak little rookie, but look at me overcome something and I
Yeah.
digivolve. And then sometimes they don't. Sometimes there is an enemy they can't overcome at the time and they have to retreat and then face it another time. Whereas Pokemon did not do that. Pokemon was always like, there was no sense of what the power was. Every Pokemon had power and they either just did stuff or didn't. So if a
Mhm.
Pokemon won, you're like, cool, it won. To whereas if a
Yeah.
Digimon won, like you saw what it took to win that fight, to grow, to overcome. And I think that was a really cool thing to show, like, hey, you might see something that you can't overcome at one point and may seem like you never could overcome this Kawagumon. But with time and with friends and with like working on who you are, eventually you'll warp digivolve into something that can handle these things and can handle smaller things that you also never thought you could.
That is a great way to look at it, and I'm almost positive it was not intentional.
No, you don't think so?
I'm like 95% certain that was never a conversation in the in the production of at least Digimon.
Yeah.
Maybe that was a conversation with Pokemon because I could see that being more of a topic in like the production side of it because they had so many more eyes on it. That's just the reality of it. Like
Oh,
I feel like, and especially working with the like major network where all right, this is our bread and butter. We need to make sure that parents aren't going to rally against this. We need to make sure that it hits all those points and checks all those boxes. I don't think Digimon thought about that, but I love that they accidentally made a very good point
yeah. They
about growth and about of the need of growing with a group of people
Yeah.
as
Yeah,
well.
I don't think Pokemon ever really does a good example of growth because, like, it feels very superficial most of the time there's growth with, like, evolution because Pokemon's evolution is really static. You just, once it happens, and it probably won't happen again except in a few rare cases. To whereas Digimon, almost all Digimon are going to grow stronger in some way and change. Um, Pokemon's like the things you'd learn from Pokemon were really more focused and small scaled. There's never an overarching like growth. It was just like in one episode you see, oh, Apom overcame being shy and like learned to ask
Mm.
for food instead of stealing it, and in this way he made friends with the people who ran the circus and has found a purpose as a performer. I don't know if that's a real episode. I'm fully making it up. But that's the scope
I
of
believed it.
Pokemon. It's like little nursery
Yeah,
rhyme kind of like
yeah.
lessons of various sorts, which is cool, but I don't think it had that as heavy impact as Digimon did of like continuous growth and like being able to see it feel really tangible with the characters you've grown with. Most Pokemon morals happen to characters that just stumble into the episode.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that's a great way to bring us into this, because um, thinking about the different ways that those different franchises approach emotional weight in a plot line, I have a question, and this is a genuine question. It's not. It might sound rhetorical, of like, did they ever do this? But like, maybe they did, and I just didn't know about it. Is there any parallel that you can find with Pokemon to the brother dynamic of Matt and TK, being half brothers from a split home, a divided home and everything? Because that right out the gate, like season 1,
yeah.
they're laying some heavy shit on kids
Uh,
with like children of divorce.
So
did Pokemon get into that at all?
never anything is close. Like Pokemon is definitely a much more baby. The original Pokemon series, I mean, was a much more baby down version as far as the show goes of any issue like that. Later on, they started to get into some stuff, and they did have like siblings that traveled with Ash, which is a series I didn't really watch much. But yeah, Pokemon almost had this utopia when it came to like family dynamics and stuff. In the show, in the games, things got a lot more complex, interesting, and dark. In the game Sun and Moon, there is two antagonist groups. There's Team Skull, which are the punk gangsters kind of messing up the town, and then there is the Aether Foundation, which is kind of like a PETA kind of group. They're there, and they are good, but their leader is kind of obsessed with these new type of Pokemon called Ultra Beasts, which reign from another dimension. And she's so obsessed that she kind of like neglects and abuses her children. Yes, and so one of them is kind of this anti-hero kid, and then the other one follows around with you and finds the legendary and has empathy and cares for it. And through this story, you see how they both kind of process this stuff with their mom, and their mom doesn't necessarily redeem herself, but does come to a point of like learning she needs to fix things, but is to the point where this one girl, Lily, her daughter, has this like hat and her hair flow down, and then you see the Ultra Beast that the mom's obsessed with, and it looks just like how she styled her daughter, like that kind of obsession. And it was really interesting to see that and see how the characters handle it, and the two siblings in different ways, and how it goes through, especially because in Pokemon, there was never a good and bad team, and one also happens to have some dark, sinister stuff to it. So even though it wasn't a surprise, it was new, different, and it was interesting to see how it shaped the dynamics of everything. What sucks is Pokemon always kind of like re-releases their games within like a year or two as a better version. Usually it's one game compared to the two they previously released, but sometimes they do sequels. They did Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. They changed things, but not the voice line, so they made her less like dark and not really child abusey, but didn't change like how the story progressed, so it became a mess. So that sucks. So yeah, if you ever want to experience that, don't play Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. But yeah, the games will touch on more heavy things. The show never did. It didn't. I don't want to say like it just didn't respect its audience, because it did have like a lot of emotional stuff that could be pretty heavy for a kid, but nothing about real life interpersonal struggles that could hit so hard.
Didn't seem to be the intention either.
Yeah.
Like it seemed to be, and this is coming from a guy who hasn't actually sat down and watched Pokemon in well over 15 years, probably going on 20. But from what I always like, the vibe I got from the tone of Pokemon was that it was a happier form of escapism than Digimon.
Yes.
Like you nailed it with utopian. Like it is more utopian, because there's always going to be that next town up the road, and there's going to be like I would assume 3 Poké Center, where you can get healed and stuff. Like that's the stuff. That's like a Star Trek world, That's utopia. So you're not gonna have as much of those kind of heavier moments, I guess, in a kid's context for
Yeah.
that sort of world,
And I think it's good that they were that different, because if a child was interested in Pokemon and Digimon, they had two different levels, like, for comfort, you know?
Yep.
You know, as an adult, a lot of Pokemon fans want to see something a little more dark and gritty. And it's like, yeah, that would be cool for a sake, but it is good that in a landscape of cartoons nowadays, especially, that have a lot of heavier topics that children can work through those mediums, it's kind of nice that Pokemon is so light, you know,
Yeah,
because but
absolutely.
still isn't bland. Like, it still has things, it still has moments that'll hit you hard. Are you familiar with the Charmander
Oh,
plot? Yeah.
oh yeah.
Well,
We're
just
talking
for
about the original, like
yes.
that where he's in the rain.
Yeah,
And
so
oh yeah.
for listeners who don't know, Charmander is a very well-known Pokemon, especially at the time. It was one of the first three starters, a little lizard with a flame on its tail. The lore is, if that flame goes out, Charmander will die. Like, that's just, it's dead. And a trainer left it out in the rain and was like, I'll come back, or left it outside on a rock, was like, I'll come back for you, whatever.
Come back for you.
Yeah, and just left. Didn't want it. This trainer had tons of Pokemon. And Ash and the group of heroes recognized that this Pokemon was going to die, because even in the rain, it stayed out there. And so they took action to save it. And then the Charmander tried getting with its trainer and saw that its trainer didn't want it. It was heartbroken. And then Ash worked to build trust with it. And throughout the whole series, I think, what, a 20-year series? They just now started a new series. That Charmander is like one of the most important Pokemon to Ash. And granted, each season of Pokemon, he switches to a full new team besides Pikachu. That Charmander always comes back. The
really?
Charizard, yeah. And there's a lot of emotional scenes with that. And, like, you know, that was as deep as it gets, and I'm sure that made a lot of people cry.
I cried.
Yeah.
I remember that vividly. I remember crying at that episode. Yeah, absolutely. So, I cried at that episode. I also cried at the Butterfree.
Yes, Ash
I
saying
think
goodbye.
Most people did.
Yeah,
most people cried at that one.
And that's such an easy thing to relate to. You know, we've all have, especially as kids, when you don't have control of where you live, if your family moved, which I'd say during the 90s, like moving for work was pretty common, because, you know, this economy that was really shifting around in the 90s, and you didn't have telecommuting jobs as much, so most kids probably went through a move at one point. I know I did.
I went through many. Yeah.
And granted, the Butterfree thing is like, we know Butterfree's going on to a better life, and you could hope that for your friend that moves, but like it really helps kids process something like that, I think.
Yeah, of course, because it's just, again, it's a scary thing. It's like, what if we're not going to be friends anymore? You know, you say you're going to write, but, you know.
Well, what if you find a girlfriend like Butterfree did, you know?
Exactly. You know? Yeah, that's... Now I'm trying to think of more, like, of those early moments in Pokemon that I might recall being a little on the heavier side.
Yeah,
not much else is coming to mind.
To be transparent, I was never too into the Pokemon show, so it's not like I watched
you're
every
more
episode.
Of the game side.
Yes, yeah. Games, and then the first few movies, while they were good, the movies started pandering out pretty quickly, though. A lot of Pokemon
Oh, sorry, go on.
A lot of Pokemon movies are like, here is a story, how do we bullshit Ash into it?
Yeah.
It's like, this would have been so much better otherwise.
I'm curious your thoughts on, specifically with what we're talking about, not just your thoughts I'm curious what your thoughts are in general about this movie, of course, too, but specifically how it dealt with that kind of heavier emotional tone. What did you think of Detective Pikachu?
Oh, Detective Pikachu. So first off, I cried within the first few minutes, just seeing all the, like, Pidgeys fly through the fields, and, like, seeing that reality of Pokemon.
That was a big deal.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for it. I just, in theaters, just burst out crying. Even now, I'm like, oh, that's so real.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked that. They definitely did a good job of like taking Pokemon, knowing that it's not just like kids new to the series probably coming to this movie, and going a little darker of a route and a more heavier emotion of the kid bonding with his father, but they didn't know it was his father the whole time. Um, I liked it. What did you think?
I enjoyed it too. I only saw it the one time. I think that was a red box
Yeah.
rental. Um, and I remember feeling like it it handled tone pretty well, like it balanced things well. Because I was worried that it was going to be all or nothing on one extreme. It was going to be just really, really goofy,
Yeah.
or so gritty and like I don't know. That'll really turn me off from any kind of movie if it's just being so dark
Just
and gritty.
edgelord, yeah.
Especially, yeah, edgelordy and like especially if it's like a beloved, childhood type franchise. I get really bored of like, well, let's make it dark now. That's just. But I'm with you on the pretty profound effect that seeing like that level of reality for these little creatures that we've spent our lives looking at. And I'm in general pretty resistant to anything that's hyper realistic for CG.
Yeah, me too.
I would rather like give me more style. Like
Yeah.
give me an artist's perspective on it.
Roger Rabbit it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Give me something like that. And just I feel like we fall into that trap so heavily with things with that uncanny valley. We're just like, this is too real. I don't. It's losing something altogether.
Would you like to know how they came about the style for that movie?
I would love to know that.
So since DeviantArt became a thing throughout the times, there's always been people that are like, "What if a Pokemon was a real thing?" And here's a photoshopped version of that. And eventually, we got a like well-trained fine artist named R.J. Palmer who did realistic Pokemon. And his thing was when he drew these Pokemon, rather than trying to make a real version of a Pokemon, like say Hauntar, who's a ghost with floating hands, he designed it as like a bat, and the wing membrane was so thin you barely saw it, and then the hands had a lot of fur, so it's floating. So it's really much like tricking real life creatures into the like shape and recognizability of Pokemon. And he's just like a master of anatomy and creativity that he just nailed these. But he got recognized, and so when they went to make Detective Pikachu, which is an adaptation, not adaptation, but it's based off a video game. There's a Detective Pikachu game, different story from my understanding. But they contacted him, and he worked on it, which I think if you just hear that and you saw his stuff, like his stuff was really cool and interesting, but not magical. It didn't like bring Pokemon to life. It was just a cool take. But he's spent a lot of time working with the Pokemon company, and also just thinking as a long like lifetime fan of like what's the balance of realism and Pokemon designs, and when to shift that balance, when to lean into the uncanny of something doesn't work, and just makes it uncomfortable. Like Mr. Mime, he really added the texture of that dodgeball feel, or Lickitung just being so drooly, and having a fan that is such a dedicated artist and has already experimented in so many different directions of like realism Pokemon, to then come on and have the time to develop this made it what it is. Because if it was done any other way, I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah.
I mean, the Roger Rabbit aspect I would love, but it wouldn't have made me cry like I did at the beginning of that movie.
Absolutely. If it would have been even beautiful hand-drawn animation, it wouldn't have shocked you.
Yeah.
Because that's what that emotional response was. That was shock. That was like, oh my God, Pidgeys are real.
And
Because
especially
there they are.
since it's a movie, meaning it's a contained source of media. I know this isn't going to affect the rest of my Pokemon.
Yeah.
So, you have that freedom to do something a little different there, and they nailed it. And just a sub tangent off of that, Pokemon has to stay cartoony for the most part. Sure, they made it work pretty well for the movie, but a lot of times it's like hard to add realism to Pokemon because there are just some things you don't think about that gets tricked. Like Mew. Mew is this like fetus cat, and it's like technically furry, but you don't want to see it with the fur detail most of the
No.
time. And it worked in that movie when they did stuff like that because there was this little level of like unease because they picked the Pokemon really well for what would look uneasy if it was real. But nowadays, they have like shoehorn or not shoehorn. They've like tricked some little details like snake Pokemon. They don't draw the scales, but the light reflects at a certain angle and you see scales on them. Same with like eyes. At a certain angle, you can see the hexagons in bug-eyed Pokemon, but that detail isn't always present, so they still look very cartoony. And I gotta say, as like someone who's like Pokemon has to get better graphics because that's just game marketing. But like they need to stay simplistic. I think they really have not gone wrong with it. So
Yeah, seems like a good balance.
yeah.
I'm curious of if there were any other like heavy emotional moments in the games that come to mind to you, because I'm not very familiar with the plot of the games beyond Red and Blue. So
Yeah, trying to think just heavy emotional things in the games. Trying to think mostly about story because like as someone who's a fan, there's been a lot of times that like I've been impacted by the games just by the sake of what they are. Like the first time I played Pokemon X and Y, like and it was 3D, that was like really emotionally heavy because I was like, oh, like this is the new Pokemon. It's not
yeah.
little pixelated sprites anymore.
Mm.
And then there's the woes of when the Pokemon Company just does bad. But in the game stories, there's a lot of just wild stuff they'll throw at you that can impact you in a lot of ways. Like in the original games, there's this story of a Pokemon that died and Cubone wanting to see its mother again, and then it does, like in the graveyard. These were such pixelated games that like the art didn't really like magnificently tell your story, but your imagination did, and it hit hard.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, this poor little thing lost its mom, and now it has its skull on its head. And like that's the thing about Pokemon is there are some really like dark, kind of twisted things in there, but they're always like just under the skin of it. Like you have to read things and maybe put things together, or sometimes it spells it out, but it's like not in the story for a chunk of it. The Pokemon story in games. In this newest one, I think it's been out long enough that I can spoil part of it. This new game was a lot different in the sense that you are a student at a school who goes on a adventure out into the world as a learning program. And so you're still alone. You don't have people with you most of the time. But you do run into several individuals a few times as you kind of become friends with them. And is a lot different than other Pokemon games because in X and Y they tried making you like part of a group of friends and you hated them. You're like, why do I care about these jack-offs? Like there was the one character who's actually like a rival to you, and there was the other 3 or 4 that just showed up sometime, and you're like, and one's like, I want to be a Pokemon dancer. Like I don't care about you. Maybe if I saw you more or some type of emotional growth.
Are these characters that you like had to listen to a lot of their dialogue and stuff?
They
like,
just showed up like
they just
they like showed up in the beginning and then like sporadically but very rarely throughout the game until till one part in the game you're on this bridge and they come and they fight you one after another, which like sure, that's whatever. But if you do what's called a Nuzlocke, which I'll explain more later, it was a very devastating part of the game, and Nuzlocking is definitely something we should talk about in this episode.
I've heard this term before.
Yeah,
I don't know what it means at all.
We'll get to that, but
okay.
To continue on Scarlet and Violet, there's like three main stories in the game, and they at one point all converge. And one story is you are going and finding like the delinquents from the school and like taking down their bases. And the principal like meets up with you and pretends he's a kid. It's very much like, hey, fellow teenagers.
Mm.
It's very charming. Um, and as you're doing that, you're like, who is this secret organization person of all the delinquents? You find out it's this girl, Penny, and she was like kind of an outcast, but she really cared about these students. And like, as someone who was bullied, and then like seeing that these were people that were labeled as bullies, but they're actually like the ones who stopped bullies, but then got in trouble for stuff. That was like kind of emotional hitting. So like Penny's story there was cool, and then there's Arlen. Arlen was like, hey, I haven't seen my mom since I was a child, except like on TVs because she's this famous scientist. And now my dog is really sick, so I have to find herbs to make him sandwiches. And so you keep finding these herbs with Arlen, and he keeps making his dog better. And then the last time, his dog is like healed. Like at first, he's like laying down and he can barely open his eyes, and you're like, this poor dog is going to die. And then he gets better, and you're like, this dog is alive. That's beautiful. And then you go to, and then there's Nimona. Yeah. And she's like just so battle starved. She's like, you're the only person who's ever been challenged, and you're rad, and we're neighbors, and we're going to fight forever. And that's not like as emotionally impactful, but it's cool, and it helps drive a lot of the game along to have like that challenge. But anyways, these three stories converge when you're like, okay, it's time to go to the mysterious area to find what the fuck's going on with Arlen's mom. And to be honest, it depends on which game you play. If you're playing Scarlet, it's his mom. If you're playing Violet, it's his dad. They're the professors. One looks all like ancient, like with like fangs and like a big like fuzzy jacket, like caveman style. And then the dad looks like he's in Tron. And so you go there, and this is the part that really hit me because like you kind of got to know these characters and they're like your friends, and then you all like go to travel together, and you're like coasting down into this mysterious zone, and I forgot what happens. I think you like fall off or something, but they like reach their hand and grab you, and it's just like, oh, the group of friends. And like,
that's great.
This was during like, you know, this ongoing pandemic where it's hard to be with a group of friends to go on a mysterious adventure on the back of a time dragon. So it hit really hard to like see this group and have the support of these little fake digital characters. So that like hit me really hard. And then you go down and you find Arlen's mom, and it's not his mom. His mom got so obsessed with like all the wacky do with time, or his dad, the wacky do of the future time, and they permanently got stuck in the other place. And this parent is an android. Yeah. So like he finds out his parent was dead, and now his parent here is an android, and then like the android like tests you, and they were like, okay, I'm gonna shut off this like machine that's breaking time, because they're like, hey, if all these creatures from the future or all these creatures from the past keep coming in, it's going to really fuck up the ecosystem. So I can't let that happen. And so they go to shut down the machine, and then the real parent of Christmas past set up a protocol so that can't happen. So now this robot parent is getting like all corrupted, looks scary as hell, and is like, I'm so sorry, but I have to keep fighting you, potentially to the death, so your real parent's death, like time travel machine, doesn't get turned off. And you beat them, and that's kind of sad because it's like they weren't a bad guy, but they had to be.
Yeah. That's harsh.
Yeah, so you're like looking at Arlen, and like you're like, dude, we just saved your dog, and now your like parent died twice, because like then the android goes off through the time machine to stop it. So it's like you find out your mom died, and this pseudo mom who's been like your mom the whole time also kind of dies right away.
Jesus.
Yes. So it was a lot.
I can't imagine playing that. It's like what I imagine the maybe target demographic would be, which I'm assuming is maybe a little younger than
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, Pokemon games, the like root game is so easy that this is looking at like maybe 12-year-olds, you know?
yeah, that's a heavy story to lay on a 12-year-old.
And it's all just like right there at the end and no breaks. So you're just like, whoa. But then you're also like, oh my dragon can do something cool and new now. Yeah, it was really wild because like that whole game was like cool fun, and you kind of knew what was coming. There wasn't too many like surprises once you knew generally what was the deal, and then all that just like hit really fast. So it was very much whiplash, but in a way that made the end of the game very exciting, which I think Pokemon games kind of lack sometimes. So that was cool.
Yeah, I feel like it could be hard to get excited for sprites, like like that sort of um, just format in general. I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you're so invested in the story side, like, and I don't know, it doesn't say, with the exception of what you just explained, most of the storylines that I've experienced with Pokemon weren't really that heavy.
Well, so there's Pokemon. So I told you about the Sun and Moon one with the whole like neglectful mom, and then
Yeah.
before that was Black and White, where golly, I've never really finished that in a way that I knew what the story was, but it's like this dad is trying to, this guy is trying to control an entire nation, and so he kind of like neglected his son to be raised by the like elders of his cult or something.
Oh,
Uh,
jeez.
yeah, so that's wacky. And then the one, yeah, Gen 4, the story was just this dude wanted to erase all of existence because people are evil. So he's like, what if just Pokemon were in the world? What if we destroy all of humanity? And that was his goal. Um,
Kind of sensible. I
yeah.
mean, if you're going to be a evil villain, I mean, let's just establish that is an evil thing to do,
Yes.
is wiping out humanity. I'm not making an argument for that. But if you are needing to be an evil, villain of some sort, it does make somewhat sense. If you're going to eliminate something, it could be humanity, and if you're
Yeah.
going to keep something, it could be Pokemon.
Yeah. Though, to be
That
fair,
tracks.
this is more of a utopian world, so
Oh,
humans
that's
aren't
a
as
good point.
evil. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty clear that capitalism has not caused evil in this world, even though, because there's a company that has a monopoly. There's Silphco, who had the monopoly on Pokeballs, and that's never been an economic problem in any way. So, uh, yeah, not as quite level-headed as it would be in reality. But yeah, it wasn't like he's like, I'm going to control everything. He's like, no, I'm going to make a new world, and it won't have people in it.
Yeah.
And then the games before that, depending on the version you had these people that are like, hey, what if the world was all water? Or hey, what if the world was all land? And they're just like, we're going to revive a god that's going to do that. Just get rid of all water or all land.
What a strange move. I
Yes.
almost get the water more than the land. Like, what if we made it all water? Like that is more interesting because it's like
I thought
that's
so. That's
a
why I got.
whole other world under the
Yes.
surface.
Uh,
If you're just making everything land, you're used to land. You've experienced land. Who gives a shit?
yeah.
Water, all right.
Yeah. See,
You
that's why I
teach
got
me how to read under
Sapphire.
there, and yeah, I'm interested.
But either way, the giant dragon from the sky was like, because the land god and the water god start fighting at the climax of the story, and the dragon comes down, and he's just like, "Stop your bullshit. We need both." So yeah, Pokemon games have interesting stories. The problem is this the most interesting part of the story is like the climax of the evil gang. Sometimes it's not quite that, but that's the easiest way to convey it.
Yeah, the antagonist.
Yes. Gameplay wise, the climax is the Elite Four, which is like challenging four people in a row, and then the champion of the Elite Four, which was probably your rival throughout the game, or somebody who has like some type of just like notability. who wasn't too exciting until one of the newer games where like you actually cared about him. And so now the games are mixing those a little bit better. They're like, okay, what if like the whole Elite Four thing is kind of attached to like the ongoing story, or what if the climatic of the story, the evil boss, is also more challenging than the Elite Four. So yeah. But before we get into Nuzlocke, which I have to bring up, any other Digimon like game related like emotional
Game related,
impacts?
yeah. Well, actually, yeah. I feel like there were some heavy moments in Hacker's Memory and Cyber Sleuth. It's been too long since I played Digimon World to really remember much of like the. I remember that there were emotional moments, but I was so young still that it's like I don't know. I remember there being like in Digimon World, and we talked about this last episode, that there was, for me, the emotional weight of Digimon World was in how many times that game like seemed to have cliffhangers.
Oh
Like it,
yes,
and not even cliffhangers. That's not the right word for it.
just
More like
ends.
fake out
Yeah.
endings. It would just end, and you would feel like the credits were about to start rolling, and then it's just like, oh no, there's more plot. You have more to do, and like that was a roller coaster for me. So I would definitely chalk that up there with the heavier moments. But yeah, with the newer games, the uh, Cyber Sleuth and the Hackers Memory games. That gets fairly heavy
Cory?
with the I'm sorry.
Oh no, go on. Sorry.
Oh god. I'm trying to remember like the big twist plots because it's been like maybe a year and a half since I played that. But there was like the twist in, I think it's just it's the Cyber Sleuth story. Yes, because that plot is you're trying to find the person that stole your identity or something, and it turns out the whole time it was your friend who just wanted to spend more time with you.
Gaslight your
Who
friends so
missed
they're
you.
around more.
Yeah.
Well, Cora, you're forgetting a very emotionally heavy, darker, edgy game for Digimon. It's called Digimon Survive.
Oh yes.
We'll have to have a flops episode.
That that is a flop. It's just it. Maybe I'll get around to it again, but I'm still kicking myself for that one because it's a me problem.
I don't
Like
think
that's
so.
no, it's a me problem in the sense that I bought the game.
Oh,
Like I didn't do my research. Like I saw in the description that it was a visual novel, and I didn't take the time to Google that term. Like I didn't expect it to be as literal as no real gameplay. It's just clicking, and it's just, and I've never really been into like just diet, like just text
yeah.
only type games.
I
I mean, a
don't.
little bit when I was like in middle school, like text only RPGs. That was a little different because those also just seemed like magic at that age when it's
Oh
just
yeah,
like,
a
right?
book
Okay,
that changes.
yeah, it changes. Like, what? But yeah, no, Survive is dog shit. That is a dog shit game. I
Yeah,
hate it so much.
which is such a bummer because art style, one of the
Ah,
prettiest Digimon games. I think I love the style.
beautiful,
Uh,
beautiful. Yeah,
Combat looks not. I don't want to say interesting. I think I would enjoy the combat just because I like that kind of stuff. But yeah, like you said, it is so much more visual novel than anything else. Uh, wild, wild, wild,
I
wild.
thought it was gonna like combine elements of digital novel with
Yeah,
like actually being able to roam around a world. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to roam.
yeah.
That's what I want out of most games these days. If I'm sitting down at the end of a long day, I'm not really looking for I mean, frankly, like much of a brain workout, like for tactic or strategy.
Yeah.
I'm looking more for escape and visual, just I don't know, give me some eye candy and let me play in a little world for a little while.
Yeah.
And Digimon Survive does not deliver that because instead you're just forced to read a very boring story. That's the other thing. My biggest problem with it isn't even that it's um a digital novel or whatever we want to call those, a visual novel. It's that the novel that it is trying to visualize sucks.
Oh,
It's
I
not
didn't
a
know
good
that.
story. Yeah, it's just like it's not compelling. You're not like interested in these characters at all. Um, no one is like, it tries to be funny. Oh boy, it tries. It tries real hard to be funny. Which Digimon is no stranger to. Like they have a lot of cheesy moments, but I'll say it, just talking about comedy here, it's like a lot of the jokes in Cyber Sleuth and Hacker Memory pretty funny. Like it
Yeah.
was a pretty funny game. Like I enjoyed it. There's so many screenshots on my Switch of
Just
ridiculous
jokes.
dialogue. Yeah, just jokes from that game, just because it's like really intentionally goofy lines that were given to NPCs and stuff. And I'm all about that. Give me that. If you're
Yeah.
gonna have something where I'm just having to read a lot, give me something funny to read. Tell me
Yeah.
what the hell a Nuzlocke is.
Okay, Nuzlocke. So, it's funny because you're saying like you don't want challenge so much as like escapism for some of those games. Well, Nuzlocke is a way to make Pokemon games harder on yourself. So they are more challenging because a lot of Pokemon games can be too easy, despite the fact that so competitive Pokemon's like really intense because Pokemon has so many like nuances to the fights
Mhm.
that the game just doesn't do like in the story mode. So you do what's called Nuzlocke, and a Nuzlocke is self-imposed rules that essentially is you can only catch the first Pokemon you run into in each new area. So if it faints, you get no new Pokemon. So
Oh,
just that
shit.
first guy, yeah. Once a Pokemon faints, you have to release it. It's permadeath mode. Um, and you have to nickname every Pokemon. These are the main
Wait a minute.
three
Hold on. I just
rules.
want to go back a second so I understand exactly
Yeah.
what you're saying. If one of your Pokemon that you caught
Yes.
faints in battle,
Yes.
you don't get to have that Pokemon anymore. You have to get rid of that Pokemon, release it back into the wild, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, cool.
So, and then the third rule, which some people are like, well, that's not a real rule. Bullshit. The person who created this made these three rules. You
Yeah,
have to
that makes it a real
nickname.
wolf.
Yeah. You have to nickname every Pokemon you catch. And you're like, okay, sure. Why not? The problem is it's very easy to become attached to these little dudes because one, you're like not even using your favorite Pokemon or like powerful Pokemon. You use what you get. And if
Yeah,
they die, and it's like a lot of times in these games, you'll get ones that like are going to be really bad for you. So like you may have like 12 by the time you get to the second gym, but only like 7 of them are good and 6 are on your team. And if any of them die, the future's looking grim. And when they die, it's like you died on me.
yeah. And you named it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's what you don't do for a farm animal that you're gonna slaughter and eat. You don't name
Exactly.
it, you
Yeah,
know?
so you become really attached to these Pokemon and Pokemon you just never even thought about before. Like,
Mhm.
especially because you'll utilize like early route ones and stuff, and yeah, it's just a way to become really emotionally invested, but also have a new experience for a game you've played before. Um, and just go through it and like I've been real bummed out in a Nuzlocke when the little dude died.
How could you not? I
Yeah,
mean, it's yeah. You
and
have a heart.
yeah. A lot of people will make comics out of their Nuzlocke. That's what the original creator did, and he named it Nuzlocke. I think it's like based off the Pokemon Nuzleaf and like some actor who has Lock in their name, portmanteau of that. If you want to see a video, like a video series of a Nuzlocke that I think is like one of the best ones as far as like editing and really funny and stuff like that, check out Polygon Nuzlocke of X and Y. It's with Griffin McElroy,
Oh,
from the
yeah,
My
yeah,
Brother Me podcast. Great video series. You get attached or try it yourself. download Pokemon Emerald, best game to Nuzlocke. Download Emerald. You can play it in browser on like a ROM site. Or you can just buy the game for like $2 off eBay probably and put into anything that plays Game Boy Advance, which is like 10 different consoles. It's worth it. Maybe
or the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah. Those two. But yeah, let's get to the end of our show. Cory,
Yes, yeah.
can you tell me about a Pokemon that you like?
A Pokemon that I like.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to prepare for this as well. So
Well,
we're really flying at the edge here. What is a newer Pokemon that I like?
Yeah.
Um,
Last episode, you said you're self-conscious for picking the 150 originals.
I was. So I've been trying, and I'm allowing myself to even just give you a description of one.
Yeah. Which is honestly one of my favorite things to do when people are like,
Yeah.
"What's this Pokemon?"
Mm-hmm. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna break my rule already because you know what? I don't know why it just popped into my head, but it did, and I want to talk about this Pokemon. If you have any kind of insight to it that maybe I didn't know about, is it called? Is the fire duck thing called Magmar? It's one of the originals.
Yeah.
What's up with that guy?
Oh, golly.
That thing is really something, isn't he?
Yes.
Like, kind of busty. Like, it's a wild design. That is a wild design for a Pokemon. Or a Digimon. It kind of looks like a Digimon
It
at times.
does. It has some
It's just
Digi
out
vibes.
there. That is out there.
Some unique things about it is it just has like flame decals on its belly. Pokemon doesn't do that. Like it's not actual fire. It's just the pattern of fire. That's bananas. And then it's got duck like lips. Like there's nothing. I don't think it depicts it separate as a bill.
It's sort of a bill.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's real weird.
You have to address the head tits. It's got
That's
like
what they are.
Yeah, it's got like breasts for eyebrows. Or like a butt. It's so strange, and I can't remember the design concepts about it. If anyone wants to know more, Loxton on YouTube has a video about it. It's something based off a yokai. That's kind of a rabbit hole of like it's based off this, but it kind of got separated if I remember correctly. But yeah, just a golly weird dude. And then in Generation 4 of Pokemon, they decided to evolve a lot of old Pokemon they felt unfinished, and that was one of them. And for the life of me, I can't remember the name of what it turns into.
So Magmar didn't have any kind of pre-evolution in the original sort of run, right?
Nope.
It was just like, here he is.
Yep.
That's the one.
It ended up getting a baby form later on, which is cute. It just has like a 3-butt head, I think. Something weird. And then, it evolves. And the evolution, I remember, was better. But not necessarily something I thought was cool. Magmar. What a weird thing we're going to have to look at forever. Because it's going to be on our screen next episode.
It's going to be. What's a Digimon you like, Milk?
So also kind of in the wacky department, it's X-Tyrannomon. Are you familiar with X-Tyrannomon?
I am. Yeah. Why do you like X-Tyrannomon?
Because Tyrannomon was like a cool dinosaur, but it wasn't the titular dinosaur, Greymon. But it wasn't like it. I liked that it like I said like so many times. I liked that it was very inspired by cartoon dinosaur in the sense that it had those big green spikes on its back, but it looked dark and scary. And then it could even evolve into this other version, Dark Tyrannomon, where it's got belts on it now and like gashes. Or it can evolve into something really stupid, which was X-Tyrannomon, because it's like a giant plush of Tyrannomon. Like there's staples to like hold the plush together, a big old zipper, and its limbs actually have like big coat buttons like on it to hold it down. It's big old teddy bear, but the mouth's open and there's eyes in it. Which I like because, for one, it's staying the Tyrannomon core concept design, except the actual Digimon there must not be that because it's inside. So I'm like, what's inside this? Is it something completely different? Is it another just smaller dinosaur wearing this bigger dinosaur costume? And just the fact that its costume, it was a costume. Like, that was such a cool concept of like this monster is just always in costume, and it's dumb and silly, while still looking gritty as most Digimon official art does. So it was, that's a concept we see a lot more in Digimon nowadays, or just as time progresses, we've seen a lot of designs like that. I wouldn't say they're adding more, but it was the first time I saw that in Digimon, and Pokemon had nothing like that. They eventually copied it in Mimikyu, which
that was the first thing I thought of with that. I was like, oh, they're kind of doing that. All right.
Yeah. But I loved X-Tyrannomon. It also, the whole like eyes inside hidden. We saw that in Digitomon, the egg, but like that was kind of a little too obscure for little child Milk. Those two Japanese yokai. So I thought it was cool, but like I couldn't latch to it. To whereas X-Tyrannomon, I was like, I get what this is, and it's dumb, but also sinister. So
yeah, got my attention.
Yeah, that's mine. And golly, we're gonna have so much pinks and reds on our border. Next episode, no pink or red Digimon or Pokemon.
Right. That's the deal. And we'll figure out what we'll talk about at some point over the course of the next week or so. The next show is going to be not next week, but the week after, right?
June 22nd, catch us, 7 p.m. Join the chat. Tell us what you think, whether it's about the topic of the current or last one. If you've watched this as a VOD and you're like, I've got emotional damage or healing from these, let us know.
Yes, please. Give us a reason to make a social media page for this stupid show. Exactly. So we can interact with you idiots. That's all we really want to do, is interact with you idiots.
Yeah, truly.
And I think that these are two franchises that just beg to be discussed by dorks on the internet.
Yeah.
So just be dorks with us, folks.
Yeah, and you can send messages to Stab on social media. They'll find their way to us. Also, Stab has a Discord, so you can join that and chat with me, and then I'll rope Cory.
I have a Discord now.
Yeah.
They showed me how to do it.
But for now, I think it's important to remember the real friends along the way were the monsters we fought.
I think that the Mons we make today are the Mons we remember tomorrow.
Ooh, I like that. With that, we'll sign off.
I like how it's just a matter of phrasing, because that's a very dumb statement. But if you say it with those commas in those places, it sounds deep.
I mean,
this was a fun show. I hope you have a great night, Milk, and I hope anyone who watches